Today's question, is your Bitcoin at risk if you own a cold card? In light of a new critical vulnerability published on CoinKite's blog on July 30th, 2026, yes, it may be at risk, but keep calm and put a plan into place to avoid costly mistakes by rushing or not having all the information. Welcome to the Drama-Free Bitcoin, where we have a calm and relaxed take on the Bitcoin market space. First off, this is not financial advice, and you're responsible for your own choices and any changes you make to your own devices and hardware setup. Also, make sure to review official channels from CoinKite for any technical information about the vulnerability. Also, I wanted to first talk about a warning about scammers. When things like this go out into the news space, a lot of times scammers will take advantage of this and try to pressure or rush people into clicking on links or following certain procedures, which can make them lose money. So make sure to go to official channels and follow the correct procedures in order to secure your Bitcoin. Okay, so first off, let's look at who is not affected by this. If you have a hardware wallet by another company besides CoinKite that isn't a cold card, then you are not affected, with the one caveat being that if you did sign your keys or generate your keys on a cold card and then move them to the other hardware wallet, you are affected. The second person that wouldn't be affected is if your Bitcoin is stored with a custodian like River or Coinbase. And then the third would be if you have an ETF like IBIT or ARK, where they hold the Bitcoin reserve for you, or if it's on another exchange, then you would not be affected. So I want to bring up this blog post here on CoinKite. It's blog.coinkite.com, and they have an MK3 security advisory, but it does have an effect on other devices besides the MK3. First of all, CoinKite has released firmware updates, and realize that updating the firmware alone is not enough to resolve the risk to you. So first I'm going to explain what happened in layman's terms so you can better understand. The MK3 used code when it generates keys that uses a thing called 40 bits of entropy. And with that, I think there's probably about 1 trillion potential options. It's pretty much the equivalent of having a dictionary with a bunch of words in it, right? 1 trillion's a lot of words, but it's a very finite amount with really powerful computers. If an attacker knows that, oh wow, your password is one of the words in this dictionary, if I just keep going through it, eventually I will hit it. And that's what they're doing with this MK3 Coldcard exploit. They've identified that there's only a certain set of possible keys that could have been generated because of the 40 bits of entropy. And they're going through and searching the public blockchain for any wallets with funds in them. And then they're running the entire dictionary of possibilities against that. What's interesting about this is it has nothing to do with your actual device security. It could be in a safe, it could be buried 8,000 feet underground, it could be a totally secure device, which it is. It's just that when you generated your keys, they were generated without enough randomness. So it's kind of like using a password like password or bunny versus something that has quite a bit more entropy to it, more randomness to it than using a single word like bunny from the dictionary. So the Mark III version of the cold card has 40 bits of entropy, and that is highly at risk because money supposedly was already stolen from people's wallets because they just ran that whole set of potential keys against that and tried to send the money somewhere else. And if they hit one that works, then the money's gone, basically. Now, let's look at the Mark IV and the Q and the Mark V. So these are more modern ones. The Mark III came out in 2019, and I think in 2024, Mark IV came out. So if you bought your cold card before 2024, you most likely have the Mark III, and you're definitely at high risk. You're also very at high risk if you have a single hardware wallet and not a multi-sig setup. I'll talk more about that in a second. But after late 2024, if you have one of these Mark IV, Q, Mark Vs, then you have 72 bits of entropy rather than 128. So 128 is what we're looking for. It's actually exponentially harder to crack these, and it would take a very powerful, like probably a nation state actor or someone with a huge amount of resources and money and compute power. So I would say for the next couple of weeks to consider yourself moderately safe with the Mark IV and above, but it's something that eventually will be a problem. And if you have a single hardware wallet, I would be even more concerned and definitely take this serious. It's something that you'll want to recreate a new set of keys using 128-bit entropy. And you can do that by first upgrading your firmware on your CoinKite, then generating a new key, and then following the procedures that they recommend. Again, just a warning, updating the firmware does not change or repair your existing seed. So once a seed is generated in this faulty way with 40 bits of entropy or less than 128, it becomes vulnerable. And again, if that gets moved to another device, it's also still vulnerable. If you use dice when creating your seed, that adds more entropy. So 50 to 98 independent private rolls, the dice alone contribute to at least 100 bits of entropy. 99 and more gives you 2 bits of entropy. Fewer than 50, or you don't remember if you use dice, then you are potentially at risk. All right. If you used a strong, unique BIP39 passphrase, that passphrase adds an independent barrier. The risk depends on the strength of the passphrase. A short, common, pattern quoted or reused phrase may be guessable and should not be assumed to provide minimal risk. And this is not the PIN. This is a BIP39 passphrase. Even with a strong passphrase, migrate to a newly generated seed as soon as practical. Continue to protect the passphrase and do not enter it into a website or an untrusted device. On the Mark III, the MK3, the highest firmware allows you to generate a replacement seed correctly. You do not need a new Coldcard to complete the migration. Updating does not repair the affected seed. So I highly recommend reading this blog post for all the various different scenarios. And then you're going to want to be very careful when migrating and stay calm and have a plan for how to proceed. I also wanted to talk a little bit about multi-sig. So if you have a multi-sig wallet, let's say you have collaborative custody with someone like Unchained, they will have one key and their key is not affected. But if you have two CoinKite signed keys, then you are at risk still, but it's really exponentially more difficult because they'd have to associate both of your keys as part of the same account. And that happens if you expose all three public keys of your multi-sig by receiving money and sending it out on the same address. So if you use new addresses all the time, you're pretty much safe from that. But if you spend out and reuse the same addresses, then on the public blockchain, all of your addresses are available, and it is possible for the hackers to start attempting to try to hack those multi-sig addresses too. I think it's exponentially harder because I have to figure out which ones were the private keys, assume that they're cold cards, and test with the right combination of two. And so it's not as easy as hacking one simple one. So this buys you, I think, quite a bit of time. I think it's unlikely right now with a multi-sig, even with two MK4 or above, that you have a problem in the short term, but it's something you want to replace. If you have MK3s, I would definitely look at replacing the keys immediately. But again, have a plan in place, sit down, think it through, double check everything as you go, make sure you don't make any mistakes. All right, so there's one last security concern, which is sending money out from an affected device. It is potentially possible that while it's in the mempool, it could be hacked. So there's a narrow window, even for multi-sig. It's very unlikely with either probably, but it's certainly possible. So if you haven't exposed your multi-sig addresses, it's better to exchange your keys before panic moving your money. That's all for today's update. Take calm, practical steps right now to secure your hardware wallet. And if you only have a single point of failure, this is your wake-up call to move to a multi-sig and to move to 128-bit entropy. Stay calm out there.